Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is quite an amazing crowd. It's actually not. It's what we expected. It's not that surprising to see so many of you here to talk with the artist Richard Misrach at the inauguration of his exhibition 1991, the Oakland-Berkeley Fire Aftermath, photographs by Richard Misrach. My name is Lucinda Barnes. I'm the chief curator here, and I'm very happy to welcome all of you this afternoon. This is an extraordinary exhibition for us to have here at the museum. It marks a number of things for us. First of all, I think as many of you know, this series of photographs taken by internationally renowned photographer Richard Misrach and Bay Area artist. The images were taken in the days immediately following the firestorm in the Oakland-Berkeley hills in 1991, and next week will mark the 20th anniversary of that catastrophic natural disaster. Richard, in that period of time, and he'll talk about this in more detail, but when he started photographing in those days and weeks, he took some 500 images in the ruins of the area. And from those, he selected a group of 14 large-scale photographs like the large ones you see here and in Gallery 4, the gallery preceding, and also made a number of smaller images here. So from that enormous body of imagery, he very carefully selected this group. What's also, and he waited 20 years to print these photographs out of respect for those who lost homes, lives, and suffered impact of this, which so many people here did. One of the extraordinary things, too, about this exhibition, and this exhibition also marks this, is that about a year ago, maybe a bit longer, Richard started talking with us and the Oakland Museum of California about making an extraordinary gift to both our museums, this series of work. So 7 of these large 14 have come to, Richard has generously, very generously donated to our permanent collection, and 7 of them he's donated to the Oakland Museum's permanent collection, as well as all of the images on the back wall. Richard has made a gift to our permanent collection, and another set of those for the Oakland Museum. So it's a gift to our community, it's a gift to our institutions, and a gift to our community. And the other really lovely thing about this project is that the Oakland Museum and our museum are at the same time simultaneously presenting this exhibition of the same work. So it really is it's a community event. Let me think. One other thing a couple of things I want to mention before Richard gets started. One, I want all of you there's a table in the back of this gallery that has a gorgeous big book. It's an elegy book that Richard has designed. It has been handmade. It's a book that will stay with this collection, and it is a book that is here for your comments, for your observations, and for your memories. And it will live on with this collection. So please contribute to that. You will see that people have already written extraordinary, wonderful, touching comments in the book. At the end of today's talk, Richard is going to do a book signing of the new book that he has published of this series of work, 1991. And that book signing will be in our lobby. So there it is. It's in our store. It's available, so he'll do book signings of that. I also want to note that we have a second exhibition of Richard's work in the museum, in our theater gallery, and it is, and I want to thank Stephanie Canizzo, assistant curator, who curated that exhibition. It is a range of works from our permanent collection, really covering almost the entire history of Richard's work, and a nice display of the many books that he's published over the years. So let me think, are there any other things I was going to tell people that you can remember? We have extraordinary education and public programs that Karen Bennett, Associate Curator for Education, has organized. There's a flyer in each of the galleries listing all of those public programs. One of the programs includes an afternoon called Tell Your Stories, and we invite the community to come and share their stories and thoughts and memories, so among some other very, very interesting programs. So do look at those as well. I think that's it. So I think with that, I will, and of course, to my right is Richard Misrach. Thank you so very much for this, Richard. This is such a moving and touching exhibition and body of work. And I just want to say on that Richard and I were just talking about what it's like to be in this. It's so wonderful to be in the exhibition in the galleries with all of you here. It's also incredible to be in these galleries when there are not so many people here. There are fewer people here. It has a very different impact. I invite you to come back again and again. These are extraordinary works to spend time with. So I will say that it's a different experience than our huge group experience today, which is also terrific. So I think, for my side, the logical place to start is to ask you how you started on this and how this project started, how the photographing actually started.
And am I on? I'm on. Okay. So I'm tempted to sing, but it doesn't quite. I'm tone deaf too. That doesn't work. First, I wanted just to thank Lucinda and the staff. I think the show is really extraordinary. I wrote it last night. It's really a pitch perfect installation. I couldn't be happier. So that's a big thank you, and the staff has been great to work with. So I want to get that out of the way. The other thing I should mention is I'm losing my voice a little bit from a cold for the last week, so I may go in and out, but forgive me on that. In 1991, I was living in my studio in Emeryville, and like everybody else, it was a gorgeous blue day, and I saw this plume of smoke rising up over the hills. And at first didn't think too much about it, but it certainly caught our attention. Soon the sky grew black, and little bits of amber embers were dropping from the sky and floating around, ash and ember. And that's when it became clear that something really serious was happening. And like everybody else, for the rest of the day, I was just riveted with watching the images and hearing the reports of the firestorm that took place. Most of you know, but basically on the Saturday before, there had been a fire in the hills. It had been taken care of. It was no big deal. But on Sunday morning, early in the morning, the Diablo winds kicked in and just reignited the dead flames from the day before. And by noon that day, 25 people had died. Homes were going up every 11 seconds. And it was an extraordinary firestorm that was just brutal and tragic. At that time, I didn't think about photographing. It never even occurred to me. And it was only maybe a week or two later that a friend from New York was visiting and said, let's go up and take a look up there. And reluctantly, I did. But when I got up there, I was astonished. It was like a post-apocalyptic landscape, unlike anything I'd ever seen. So this was, long after the flames were out and people were evacuated and gone. There was tens of thousands of homeless people. People that had to find other places to live while this would all take place afterwards. And when I went up there with my friend, I didn't have my camera. I had no intentions of making any photographs, but I knew immediately that I wanted to photograph. And so for about the next week, I got my 8x10 camera, which is a 19th century style view camera with a bellows, and you pull a hood over your head, and on a tripod. It's a slow, cumbersome working camera, but that's what I've been using for years, and it's a way of getting tremendous detail. And it's a very slow, meditative, contemplative way of working. And for probably about a week, and my recollection isn't great because it's been 20 years, but probably for about a week, I made, I think it's actually about 200 photographs total. So just yeah. And those 200 photographs, because I worked pretty quickly, and at the time I developed the photographs, the film, processed the contact prints, and looked at the pictures, and felt I had something really strong and really important. But and there was some interest in doing some exhibitions of the work at the time. I even made a book dummy back in that period of time, and it was a really powerful small book. But the more that the news had sort of overwhelmed with spectacle, this whole event, I started feeling reluctant about putting the work out and being part of that. And the more I thought about it, I felt that it was more important to put the work away, maybe not be part of the news cycle, and see if the work held up over time, sort of transcended the news and became a historical document. And so I often talk about with this work the idea that photographs change their meaning over time. They go from being news at the time of the event to shifting to this historical value over time. And one of the biggest influences in my thinking here was Civil War photographs, which remain to this day some of my favorite photographs of all time. And I can only imagine that at the time of the Civil War that those photographs were more like journalism, more like the news, and also very brutal, that the people that lost their sons and their husbands and homes and all that must have been very tragic. And only 100 plus years later do we look at those pictures and reflect on them very, very differently. I felt that what I saw in the Oakland fire, that's what the goal was for the body of work that I had done. So at that point, I made a really radical decision for an artist, which is not to show the work, just to put it away. And I did that. It was only 5 years ago, in 2005, where there was a retrospective of my work, where I decided to look at those pictures and maybe pull out 4 or 5 of them. So out of the group of 40 pictures that you see in the 2 galleries here, 4 or 5 were shown about 5 years ago, about 15 years after the fire itself. But I'd always had this idea of the 20-year marker. Somehow I felt there would be enough removed from the pain and the tragedy that, and I knew people that had lost their homes and people that had lost their lives. And so it was a very personal feeling that I had about the work. Unlike other work maybe I've done over the years, other places, it became a very personal project. So with that idea, I put it away, and also another little footnote on there. In 2005, I went and I photographed Katrina in October, November, December of 2005. And when I photographed there, I also had the uncanny experience of reliving the Oakland fire pictures. In other words, I saw in those pictures and that environment, that post-apocalyptic landscape, a very similar, although it was a much grander scale. The Oakland fire had that same feeling, and it reminded me about that work, and I started to look at it seriously again. And so probably about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I looked at the pictures thinking, is this right for the 20-year anniversary? It felt right, and I approached the museum, both museums, and they, I think, uniquely decided to agree to show the work simultaneously, which is clearly unorthodox, but it seemed really apt given that this is a community event. And unlike other bodies of work that I've done, this is not just an art show. It really is very much about the community, and that was really important to sort of bridge those two worlds. And I think it's really beautiful what the installation has done. I'm going to read one little note before I open up to questions. And I very much, given the nature of this, originally I was asked to lecture about the work, but I felt like, given the nature of this community project, I didn't really want to be lecturing one way. I really want to be back and forth. So I'm really hoping that most of you have had a chance to look at the pictures, and I will really appreciate you sort of asking me questions about it. But one thing that's not in the exhibition that's in the book, if I could read it, and I thought it was sort of a little side note for you to maybe think about. It's almost off subject in a way. By the way, can everybody hear me okay in the back? Good. So one of the things, when working on the book, I went back and revisited some of the documents around 1991, and I found a really rich document in the 1991 FEMA report. That's the Federal Emergency Management Association. And they did a long report on the fire, and then I also found some documents written by the Chief Johnson of the Oakland Fire Department soon after the fire was done. And I read through all those, and I've incorporated some of those. I've taken excerpts from some of those documents to accompany the photographs in the book, because I thought it was really a powerful relationship between those early documents and photographs, both done around 1991. And one of the things that I excerpted from Chief Johnson is a very brief, really, really brief little quote, which really struck me. And that is, "A sole ember blew into a tree just outside the burn area, and the tree exploded into flame." This was really interesting to me because every single photograph in the show has a tree in it. There's actually one exception, but I didn't want to. You'll be a Where's Waldo. But basically, if you look at the photographs, trees are the subject of every single photograph in the exhibition. And when you look again later, you might think about that. I found that sort of a strange fact, and it was really about the trees that this ignition began. Anyway, on that note, I'd like to open it up and see if anybody has any questions. Or yes. So that's a really interesting question. Nobody's posed that one before. The question is, for those in the back that maybe couldn't hear it, is did this fire get a lot more attention because it happened to be an upscale neighborhood, and if it had been done in a poor neighborhood, maybe it wouldn't have gotten that kind of attention? I suspect that I would differ with you only in the sense that the nature of the firestorm, the fact that 20 people lost their lives, a police officer lost his life, a fireman lost his life, it was one of the largest group efforts in the history of U.S. history, and it's one of the largest fires. I can't imagine that even in a poor neighborhood, now that it wouldn't have gotten that kind of attention, and I don't know that for sure, but it was a spectacle. I mean, the flames and the nature of the fire really was a media event. And I think that had to do with that kind of attention. The response afterwards, maybe by the insurance companies or things like that, that might be a whole other issue. And that I can't speak to because I'm not an expert there. But it's very possible that, I know, for example, for Katrina, one of the biggest gripes is that the insurance companies did not help people out. And there's so much anger in that whole area. And mostly the poorer neighborhoods, the wealthier people did fine. Where in the poorer neighborhoods, like the lower Ninth Ward, for example, they had terrible difficulty getting insurance reimbursements. Or in the Mississippi, similarly, the insurance companies would say if you had flood insurance that it was wind damage, and if you had wind damage, that you had flood insurance. So that kind of thing happens, but I don't see it here exactly in terms of just the attention or the interest. Yes. Yeah, so the question is whether I made notations of where the fires, where the pictures were taken. Interestingly enough, at the time when I made the photographs, I didn't know I was going to put it away for 20 years. And of course, I didn't make those notes. However, one of the things, and I almost suggested as an installation to the exhibition, is recently I've been using Google Map, and I've actually been able to use that guy you drop on the street and walk around. I've actually found a number of these locations after the fact, because things like curb configurations or little details, you actually can triangulate and find exact locations. And I've not been able to do it to all of them, and many of the pictures I'm not sure where they were taken. But actually, that is something one can do with
And
Google.
Many of the titles, the parenthetical titles, list at least a street or an area on many of them.
Yeah, some of the titles do have the street. No, those I was able to actually find with Google mapping today, which is quite remarkable. Yes. So the question is, what was it like being there in this sort of post-apocalyptic environment? Well, like I said, when I first went up there, I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't expect that much. And when I was there, it was the scale of it, the complete decimation. that was overwhelming, and also they had started to hydroseed the environment, which is basically this stuff this green stuff, turquoise green stuff that they put on the land to stop erosion and start growing things basically to help prevent erosion too. So you had this sort of greenish landscape, and really eerie to see this place where nature and civilization collided, and nature just wiped out civilization. I mean, it's sort of classic apocalyptic kind of environment. So now this is not unsimilar to things that I've worked on before in other work. I mean, over the history of my career, I've always been interested in this conflict between nature and civilization. So I might photograph bombing ranges and dead animal pits and the Salton Sea flood in California and nuclear test sites, things like that. This was different because basically people I knew died in it, and it was much more immediate. And that was the tragedy sort of loomed in the atmosphere everywhere. Yes. Yeah. The cover of the book and basically the melted tricycle there. The question was, is there any relation to the William Eggleston photograph? And that was in fact purposeful. The William Eggleston photograph, it's actually of a tricycle in a nice suburban neighborhood, and it's from a child's perspective, and it's actually launched the photography color revolution in photography in 1976. And to me, this was sort of my, sort of a dialogue with that photograph, and it's obviously the darker side. It's not the idealistic, sweet, perfect neighborhood. It's again the civilization and nature. So yes, it's a nod to that. I mean, it's amazing. The Eggleston photograph's one of the great classic moments in photographic history. So it's a definite conscious nod to that. Yes. The question is, how do I edit from the original shoot? And one of the things that's always amazed me, I mean, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I shoot an 8x10 camera, and I'm very careful. It's not, not like digital where you pop off a lot of pictures. You have to. It's very expensive. It used to cost like $26 a shot every time I push the button. So you don't, you're not. It's not a casual thing. And even after 40 years, photography is very much about percentages. For every 100 pictures I take, usually I get one or maybe two. And you'd think after 40 years I'd get better odds, but it really it doesn't work that way. And the only thing that I can say to justify the fact that I'm not a horrible photographer is that I've studied people like Gary Winogrand's contact sheets and everybody else, or Lee Freeland or whatever, and it's the same percentage. That's part of the X factor of photography. Sometimes what looks like it's going to make a good photograph in the real world, but by the time it makes it into a print, it doesn't work anymore, and I don't know why. But that's also what makes it such a challenge, and you just don't lose your interest in the medium because it's got that X factor to it. So in terms of this work, in terms of how I edit it, often what I do, and this is a case where I've had 20 years, so I did make an original book mock-up of the work, and I went back and looked at that, and most of those pictures stayed in there. And then looking over other ones after 20 years, there was others that I included and some I pulled out. But some reason there's a sense of what's right when you're looking at the picture, when it all comes together, and having distance when you're not. I don't like editing pictures after a year, until at least a year or two gone by, if I can help it, because you're too close to them emotionally. Does that make any sense? Okay. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yes. Like I said, early on, people had wanted to show the work right at the time, and I decided not to. It was a very conscious decision. I just did not feel it didn't feel right. It didn't feel savory somehow to, have a big art exhibit, on the heels of people's tragedy. But I did think that the work was valuable and that someday it should be shown. And early on, actually, when Kevin Concy was the director of the museum, he and I talked about it at the 10-year anniversary, and he said he'd like to do it then. And I said, no, I'm not ready. And he's a friend, and he said he'd always, whenever I was ready, he said, we'd love to do the show. And so, but at the 10-year anniversary, I said, no, but I think 20 is going to feel right. And I just want to make sure it felt right. And then it, especially after Katrina, it felt like, more and more we see, whether it's in Japan or Katrina's, I mean, there's these clashes with our environment that happen over and over again. It's very important. And John McPhee wrote a great book called The Control of Nature, and he talks about it beautifully, about how we build in flood zones, and he wrote this before Katrina and before this fire, actually. But we kind of have to be more vigilant about how we do this, and living in the hills or living in earthquake country or whatever. These are not things to not consider. And so I think there's reminders and warnings in these. And anyway, I felt it was important on the 20 year. It seemed like it was a good time. And I now actually have a house in the Berkeley Hills. And reworking on this, it scared the shit out of me. Excuse me. But I went, oh my God, am I living on a steep hill? The roads to my house are very narrow. There's lots of vegetation around. So we're starting to take care of that. That's not, for those of you that live in the hills, that's not a bad thing to take away from here. Okay. Yes, that's a great question. So how many people here consider themselves survivors? They've been through the fire. If you could just by show of hands, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like quite a few. Thank you for coming, by the way. And that's actually, if I can ad-lib on that, it was a really tricky thing to show these works or not, and you don't want to step on anybody's toes or bring back bad memories. It's a very, on the other hand, that fire was historical. It was one of the largest in U.S. history and very important. And I think we can also learn from it too, which is not a bad thing. But next, yeah, I think the question was this woman went through the fire, if I heard correctly, and what she noticed afterwards was lots of Weber barbecues had survived. And it is weird. It's very weird to see actually what did survive. Often you'll see chimneys, which are very reminiscent of Civil War photographs, and there's some washer and dryers and other things. But I did not. Maybe people came back and got their Webers back when they saw them intact, because that was portable. There was 1 and 2. That's actually a really interesting question. I'll see if I can paraphrase it. So the question was, the technology of photography is going through a revolution right now. It's pretty radical. And the pictures I took with this were with that 8x10 view camera, which is old-fashioned, is about as old-fashioned analog as you can get. And then he mentioned also that, and I have another show up at SF MoMA right now. It's up for a little bit longer. And those are some of the Katrina pictures. And those photographs that are in the show were shot with a 4-megapixel pocket digital camera. So definitely not film. Now I should say about that, along with about 2,000 photographs I shot with the pocket camera, which was digital, I also shot 1,000 with the 8x10 camera as well. That was one of the last big projects I did with the film. Now those pictures I put away for 20 years also. So nobody's actually seen those yet. And those I'm actually, there's a photograph in the other room. Is it that way? Yeah, that way, the large one. All the Katrina pictures that I did are going to be 8x10 feet, which is humongous. And those were all made from film, and then what I did for those and for these is I scan the negatives, then with Photoshop I print them make large pigment prints, and I actually make these prints myself. The new technologies allowed me to actually take these old analog negatives and really bring them into the 21st century, if you will, and work with scale, work with controls that have never been possible before, and it's quite extraordinary. So, but I think to your larger question, in the last 3 years I've not shot film. So the digital technology is taking over and changing things so fast that it's just a new way of thinking, a new language for photography. It's very exciting, very, very exciting. But it is the end of an era. So the question is, how long did it take for me to make these images? This was actually a fairly short project for me. Normally, I spend like 2 years on any given subject if I'm going to do it. And this, I would say, I probably went back, I'm not sure if it's a week or 2 weeks after the fire, I don't recall, but I probably went back every day for probably about a week, maybe 5-6 days. I didn't shoot that much, but I would go in the morning. I would work from before the sun came up till the sun went down. And I would just, depending on when the light was good, I would work. But it was a pretty fast, short period because things were changing there very quickly. The question was what life forms or things in nature, I guess, that not much. It was at that point in time, there really wasn't much happening. You could see this green hydroseeding. They're like blankets of green muck on stuff, but that was to seed the place, but there really wasn't much, and I don't remember seeing anything. I didn't see very many people. Occasionally I would see a car drive up, and one or two of the photographs in the background, you can see maybe somebody, probably an owner going back and going into the property to see if they could find anything left, but that was very rare. For at least a period of time there, it was just really quiet. She was asking about the color tone, the sort of the gray, muted feeling. That's very traditionally my palette. That's sort of, the kind of light and subjects. I often work in the desert, and you get that also. But I would say here that because of all the burnt stuff, you just get a lot of gray. And then with the landscape and the light, either the early morning haze or fog or things like that, you get this sort of soft, hazy light. So the combination grayed it out. And then I think, that introduction of the hydroseeded landscapes on some of them, where it's kind of this almost pastel green, you get almost a pastel quality to the pictures. It's a little unreal, but the photographs are very straight. It's really there's no manipulation per se. It's pretty much what you would have seen. It's just shot very, with great detail with the 8x10 negative and camera. The question is there's a lot to be gained from the new digital revolution, speed, economics. There's all kinds of things there. The question is there anything that's lost? And I'd have to say no, because you can do exactly. I mean, you can do exactly what you do. The quality. I'm now making prints as large as this from digital files, and they're just as sharp and great. I can't make them 8x10 feet, which I did in the other room, but that's just a matter of time, probably in 2 years. But that's really the only downside. The upside, for example, when I would shoot with 8x10, if there was any breeze, I couldn't take a picture. I'd have to wait because the thing shakes like a sailboat. And if I took an exposure, it would take me probably a couple minutes or a minute or so before I could get another film slot in there to make another one. And, when I go on trips, I would take 30 loaded film holders, and then if I shoot them out in the first morning, then I'm done for the day, whether I want to be or not. With a digital back, I can shoot 450 photographs of the same quality in 3 minutes and not have to stop. And then also developing film. When I go on a photographic trip, I'd come back, develop the film, contact. By the time I got that back, it would be 2 months before I saw what I actually shot on a trip. Now when I go on my trips, within 24 hours, I'm making prints the size of my studio, and I've seen everything that I've shot. I just download it, look at it, start printing. It's such a efficient, amazing new way to work. It's hard to find any real downsides. There's nostalgia. I have nostalgia for daguerreotypes too, but I don't think I would be using them for most things I'm doing. Well, the question is there something to be said for the rituals and the discipline of the old way? And the good news for me is I already have that. So I benefit from being trained working with an old-fashioned, ridiculous camera for 30 years, and then I can bring that to working digital. But yes, I understand your point. The problem for new people shooting, and I don't think it's a real problem, it's different, is that people tend to work sloppy and faster, and I think you'll get a different kind of aesthetic out of that. Just like, when 35 millimeter cameras were introduced, as opposed to the older view cameras, people thought that's the end of photography. Anybody can take a picture, and it didn't really prove to be that way. And I think that's always the case. So I think bottom line is really good pictures are going to take their own kind of discipline. We just have a new language. You're going to make me print in 20 years? I'm already 62. But seriously, you're talking about the digital, or? Yeah, there's ways to do that. It's a little more complicated, but basically you have, let's see, backup drives or other kinds of backup drives, and you have to be very organized, and you have to, there's ways to, this is getting really, really geeky and technical, but basically you just have to back up your files and label them well and have a system of organization. But we do that with film too. You have to have redundancy. You have to copy. One of the things I learned in photographing Katrina is there was a photographer that had backed up all his work in his studio at his home, and he lost both places. And living in California, I'm very aware of that. So I have backups of everything digitally, both at my home, but I also have them at my labs, like in Los Angeles or other places, so that I have, and then I even back up further, and then I do not only LC backups, but then I do disk backups too. So you have to work really hard. Right. So the question is I think, am I realistic to think that I'm going to be able to put away my Katrina work for another 20 years, like I did with the Oakland fire, because that was a long time ago? And that's actually a really legitimate question. This year I did release the small pictures for the show on the 5-year anniversary. So I broke my rule there with that work. And there's a possibility that I will decide to show that other work earlier, especially, if my health changes or whatever. What I am doing now is right now I'm actually in the process of making the prints and at least producing the work. This work I just produced in this last year. I'm actually producing that work and putting away, and probably will go to a couple key museums with the idea that, when the time comes that they can show it. So I'm taking care of it in advance. And there might be a reason to do it before. I did actually release a couple of the big pictures to private collections. They were bought, and the money went to help build the lower Ninth Ward with the Make It Right Foundation. So I used the money to raise. I used the pictures from Katrina, the big ones, to raise money for that. That's something I should say too, which is both with the Oakland fire pictures and the Katrina pictures, and this is the only series I've done that. I don't sell any of that work. All that work goes, if any of those things sell, the money goes to nonprofits or charities or like organizations like. Oh, thank you. Yeah. No, that feels right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And the back? No, that's a really good question. Is that you, Deborah? Okay. Of course it would come from you, wise guy. No. Yeah. So I think the question is, and I've been accused in the past of aestheticizing the Holocaust. What they mean by that is that I often photograph really difficult subjects and make really beautiful formal prints out of that. And it's something that I've been doing for 30 or 40 years. There was lots of photographs taken of the fire and the aftermath, but for me, the ones that are memorable have this sort of formal aesthetic component that make them lookable, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so it's very important that the content of my work gets met by the formal treatment. And my belief is, and this has always been it, that when there's photographs of the daily news on the newspaper, we look at it and it's tossed away. And only by formalizing that beauty, almost in the way that history paintings worked, it iconicizes a moment. It actually helps a moment transcend, so that it's not any longer just about the tragedy or disaster or the problem in front of us, but something about our historical moment that needs to be preserved. And so I do believe that photography and the painting stopped doing that kind of thing in the past, but historically that painting served that role too. And sort of making a special way of retaining that history that lasts and that people want to go back and review and look at and think about and contemplate. So my attention to aesthetic details, like, again, it's all about the right light, formal composition, making something that really resonates visually, aesthetically. I do believe in the power of aesthetics to convey that. The question is that it seems like there's no buildings that survived in my photographs, and that's true that most of the areas that I have are rife with devastation. But actually, if you look in some of the smaller ones, you can see like a chimney where the house, all that's left is the house is the chimney, and right in the background you see this gorgeous place in Rockridge, 2-story mansion that's in perfect condition. I mean, if you look carefully, you'll find them. So you see them, but a lot of the areas like Hiller Highlands, places like that, I mean, it was 100% devastation. No? Kaiser Elementary School. Okay. I've been corrected. But let's put it this way. That was the only thing. So there's vast arrays of ongoing, in other words, it's not like, here a house burned down and here a house, there was areas of pretty severe devastation. So the question is why was I so masochistic to build a house in the Berkeley Hills, or buy a house in the Berkeley Hills and live there? Well, and I'm like everybody else. We quickly forget because for the view, for beauty, I mean, look, people say, why do you live in California? So, then we're all guilty. So I don't know how to answer that except for that's what human beings do. We tend to sort of put that to the side of our minds. That doesn't mean we can't be vigilant, though, and try to at least, do what we can to, and I think that's very, very important. I'm certainly been awoken again. Thank you. That was a cheap plug for my book called Golden Gate, which is a series of photographs of the Golden Gate Bridge that I photographed from my front porch.
And we also exhibited those photographs here just about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was about 10 years ago. Yeah.
In fact, some are downstairs.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of the criminal photographs are downstairs. But yeah.
Yeah. Wonder if we could maybe wrap up with a couple of last questions and then retire to the book signing and the in the lobby and people stay and look at the photographs.
That sounds good because I'm going to lose my voice pretty too. But the question was, why did I photograph during the day? There wasn't much to shoot at night with an 8x10 camera. There was no light there, so I never actually. I photographed at night before in other situations, but with this series, it didn't make any sense. Although I imagine if I'd used artificial light and set up something, it could have been quite stark. But yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Next time. I should also say that I actually, in my earlier years, I went through 2 fires myself, and I didn't lose my home, but I lost all my negatives at a lab, and then also my studio was. The smoke and water damage from a fire next door destroyed everything in my studio. So it was very a touchy thing to even do the work. But Kelly, thank you very much, and
And I want to also, on behalf of the museum, I want to thank all of you. This is an extraordinary event for us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, Richard.